When the weight of grief is unbearable, the idea of taking a step forward feels impossible. You might ask yourself, how can I take another step when every part of me is broken? I understand that so much, friend. I've been there. The thought of going on without your child can make you feel like you're betraying them, like moving forward means leaving them behind. But I want to remind you of something very powerful. Continuing to live is not forgetting or betrayal. It is honoring. Stick with me, friends. We are going to cover a lot on today's episode. I'm going to give you the tools that you need to answer the question, how do I continue living without my child? If you're grieving the death of your child and you want the steps that lead to believing with confidence that life is still worth living, then you're in the right place. Hello, I'm Teresa, a grief mentor. That's been where you are, and I teach grieving moms like you how to navigate life after child loss. If you're ready to take a step of courage and build a solid foundation to live with hope and purpose, then I'm here to teach you how. Are you ready for what God has for you? Then I'm ready to teach you. Before we dive in today, friends, I want to remind you that you do not have to walk this road alone. If you need someone to help you process your grief, I invite you to spend some time with me. I went into great detail on the last podcast, reviewing with you all of the ways that I can support you. I gave you 6 free ways that I can support you. And can you believe that I left off the podcast? That is the number one way that I feel like I can support you in your grief. And of course, that is free to you as well. So there are 7 ways that I'm able to support you in your grief. And I invite you to participate in every single one of those ways. But if you feel that little nudge that you need to go deeper, that's when it's time to sit down with me, friend. So go to thegriefmentor.com and book your call today. Now, I'm going to set us up today for a teaching piece that I feel like has significant potential to help you navigate this hard road that you're living in right now. Because, friend, my greatest desire in my heart is to help you find the tools to not just exist after your child leaves your side, but to live again. Because here's the facts. There's no finish line when it comes to your grief, right? Unless you want to call the finish line when you hear the words, "Welcome home, my good and faithful servant." When you hear those words, that might be your finish line. But right now, you're not there, friend. So how do you view your grief journey in such a way that it brings the prospect of being able to live again? That's what we're going to talk about today. Because when we say move on, I want you to strike that from your vocabulary. I don't want you to ever say it again, because that not only is it a lie, it is a misrepresentation of what we do when we process our grief. Because what did I tell you in the opening? Right? When we continue to live, we are honoring our children. Okay? So there's no more of this moving on verbiage, because that implies that you're leaving something behind, and we're not doing that. So what you do, though, is you learn to carry your love for them and their love for you with you as you take that step into the unknown, right? Because that's the scary part about it, because what lies ahead of us is not known to us, right? And it feels like such a huge step. So what we're going to focus on today is taking one step at a time, one breath at a time, one moment at a time. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 34, it says, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." Friend, you don't have to figure out how to live the rest of your life without your child. When we sit in that space, the overwhelm is devastating to us, right? I don't want you to be there. I want you to live in the moment that you're in right now. Just trust God with today. And when tomorrow comes, His grace will be there to meet you again. Some days you might feel a little stronger. That is the way of grief. Other days you might fall apart over and over again, and that's okay. Reaching a place where you can live again and not just exist isn't about never feeling any pain, friend. We live here on this earth and we wear these earth suits. We are going to have pain and we are going to suffer. Believing that you won't is setting yourself up for a great fall. But what it is about is allowing God to meet you in your pain and helping carry you through it. One of the hardest parts of child loss is the fear that somehow the world is going to forget about our kid. But friend, you will never forget. And the love you have for your child is still alive. We talked about that in the last podcast that I gave you on Saturday. You carry them in the way you love others, in the way you speak their name, in the way you share their life with others, in the way you honor them with your memories. Their story is woven into yours, and nothing, not even death, can take that away, friend. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I pray that the sound of that verse brings you the comfort that it is intended, because that's what He's offering you today. Not an answer to all your questions, not a roadmap for the rest of your life, but rest, friend. A place to lay down the unbearable weight and simply be held. So if you don't know how to keep living without your child, I want you to take a deep breath, because you don't have to have all the answers. It doesn't mean you can't ask the questions, because if you know me and you have listened to any of my podcasts, you know that I ask question after question. I was that annoying little kid that lives in your neighborhood that just keeps knocking on your door because they want you to come out and play. Okay, that's the way I was with the Holy Spirit. I just knocked and knocked and knocked. I'm pretty sure that my knuckles are imprinted on the door, right? That doesn't mean that we don't stop asking those questions, but where the rest comes in is knowing that we don't have to have all the answers. Deuteronomy 29:29 says, "Some things are held in the secret place, but the things revealed to you are revealed to you." That's what you focus on, friend. Okay? You don't have to know what the rest of 2025 looks like right now. It's about taking the next step and then trusting God that He's going to meet you there. Now, I want to share some information with you today that I pray opens your eyes. When we are dying on the inside, when no one can physically see that, there is so much going on inside of our bodies, friend. And I want to spend some time talking about that, because in my medical background, I simply cannot let you ignore this. So the first thing we're going to do is review the physical effects that grief has on your body. Now, pay attention, because I want you to get this. But, and that's a big but, friend, I don't want you to become stuck in what I'm about to share with you, or I don't want you to obsess about it and get your thoughts fixed on it to where that even adds more stress. The whole point of today's episode is to teach you how to manage your grief from a perspective of living, not just existing after your child leaves your side. So I have much to teach you today. I want to teach you how to overcome, but first I have to help you see what you are overcoming. then I'm going to give you the tools to do it. So stick with me here as we go through these. Now, we're going to kind of move through these quickly so that we can get to the good part. Some of this I have shared with you in previous episodes, but this time it's a little bit different, and I'm going to kind of go a little deeper. So stick with me here. I'm going to talk to you about the physical impact of grief after child loss. Losing a child is one of the most devastating experiences that a person can endure. The emotional toll is immense. And what is often less talked about, however, is how deeply grief impacts our body. And I want to give you a little window in that today. Child loss grief isn't just an emotional or spiritual struggle. It's a full body experience. And I know that you understand that full on. But I want to share with you some specific ways that your physical health can be affected in profound ways. Now, I need to give a disclaimer right here. I am not a physician. I am not giving you medical advice. Anything you hear today on this show or any other show that I provide for you is for teaching purposes only. It's for helping you become more aware, because friends, when we're grieving, we're like the horses, right? Tony and I live right here in a little town called Sellersburg. We're just 20 minutes away from the Louisville where they do the Kentucky Derby. So, the horses, when they put the little blinders on them, so all they can see is what is right in front of them, is how we are when we grieve, right? We have just tunnel vision, right? Just get through the next moment, just get through the next day. So what I want to help you see, you may not even realize. So if you recognize anything that I'm about to teach you, I want you to seek medical attention, and I'm very serious about that, okay? If you are having any of the symptoms that I'm about to go through, it's time to seek medical attention, and if it's necessary, go to the emergency room. All right, number one, the heart feels the loss, literally. Grief can manifest in physical symptoms, and for some, it can even be life-threatening. Studies have shown that intense grief, especially from child loss, can increase the risk of heart-related issues. So let me break this down for you. If you are having chest pain or shortness of breath on exertion, which means when you get up and walk around, when you walk up a set of stairs, if you're getting any kind of dull ache in your chest, especially for women, if you're getting any kind of unusual shoulder ache or pain, or radiation up into like your back, like your little backbone up there, it's called the scapula. If you're having that kind of pain, or it's reaching up into your jawline, and it just kind of comes and goes, it may be subtle, it may be more intense. Friend, that could be a result of plaque in one of your coronary arteries. It could be a cardiac spasm. It could be many, many things. Do not ignore that. Hear me now. Do not ignore that. If you are having those symptoms, you need to seek medical attention right away and get that investigated. Don't ignore that and poo-poo it and say, oh, it's just because I'm tired today, or it's just because I didn't sleep well last night, or it's just because I missed my kid. No. Please do not ignore that, because some of the statistics that I'm going to share with you in a minute is going to shock you. And I don't want it to shock you. I don't want you to be one of those statistics. So please, please, please do not ignore those symptoms. Now, there is something called broken heart syndrome. It's a real thing, friend. This condition mimics the symptoms of a heart attack. You can have chest pain. You can have shortness of breath. You can actually have an irregular heartbeat. It's caused from a surge of stress that causes those hormones to temporarily weaken the heart muscle. Don't ignore any of those symptoms, because there is a higher risk of heart disease in bereaved parents. A 2012 study published in the Journal of American Heart Association found that parents who lose a child have an increased risk of heart attack, particularly in the beginning stages of your grief. So friend, make sure you are not ignoring the potential symptoms of a heart attack, broken heart syndrome, or maybe something even more serious. Please do not ignore that. Number 2, weakened immune system and increased inflammation. The stress of losing a child puts an enormous strain on your immune system, making grieving parents more susceptible to illness. Studies have actually showed that bereaved parents have higher levels of inflammation, which is linked to chronic conditions like heart disease, diabetes, and autoimmune disorders. A suppressed immune system makes you more vulnerable to infections, and it can cause long-term health consequences. Chronic stress from grief contributes to things like high blood pressure and increased risk of stroke. Now, the nurse in me would like to get in the weeds here, okay? I would love to go into the explanation of how that happens, but I'm going to spare you that because we have a lot to cover here. Okay, number 3, sleep disruptions and chronic fatigue. Grief often leads to severe sleep disruptions, and I know you're nodding your head with me right now, including insomnia, nightmares, night terrors, irregular sleep cycles, and the loss of sleep can have a significant impact on your physical health. And this is what it can do, right? It could increase cognitive decline and make concentrating even more difficult on top of grief brain. It can increase your anxiety and depression. There's a higher risk of obesity associated with people that do not sleep well. And it causes your metabolism to be disrupted. Many grieving parents report chronic fatigue syndrome, and those type symptoms makes your body feel constantly exhausted, even after rest. This is due to the body's prolonged stress response, which depletes that energy over time. Remember, we are living in this state of urgency, and that is like living in that fight or flight syndrome. Like a tiger is always chasing us. The body doesn't know that there's not a tiger there, friend. So we live in that heightened state of urgency, which affects everything about us. It affects our adrenal glands. It causes our bodies to produce more cortisol. It causes all of our hormones to be disrupted. And friends, let me tell you something. When we sleep, amazing things happens in our bodies. That is the way that God created us. So picture these little soldiers running around inside your bloodstream trying to get the cells to release their toxicity. And when we don't have the certain kind of sleep that we need in that REM sleep where a lot of restoration takes place, picture these little soldiers taking their little hammers and knocking on the cells saying, open up in there and let that toxic stuff out. They can't do their job. Okay, I hope that made you laugh. They can't do their job if we're not doing our job. We have to make sure that we are providing our bodies with what it needs to be able to support us during our grief journey. Now, number 4, digestive issues and appetite changes. And I know you're probably nodding your head saying, yeah, I know. But this is, so tune in. If you are having some digestive issues and appetite changes, then pay attention. The gut is often referred to as the second brain. Did you know that? And when grief takes over, it directly affects your digestion. Many grieving parents experience loss of appetite, which leads to maybe unintended weight loss and nutritional deficiencies because we're not paying attention to what's going in our mouth, right? We're just eating out of sometimes boredom, or even we're eating because, we're really hungry and we don't even realize it. We're not paying attention to what we're putting in our bodies. So often we end up with nutritional deficiencies. And guess what, friends? That is going to affect your body and your digestion. Emotional eating, where food becomes your coping mechanism, leading us to unhealthy weight gain. This is definitely something that I've struggled, and I have shared that with you guys. I would not sleep at night, and I would get up and eat, and then the next day I would see the evidence of it, and I didn't even know that I was doing it. It was like my body was doing its own thing. It was trying to comfort me. So that's one thing that I definitely dealt with. Gastrointestinal issues such as nausea, stomach pain, acid reflux, or irritable bowel syndrome. Most of you that follow me know that I am a GI nurse. So this is my wheelhouse, friends. So we could spend so much time right here. But I do want to point out 2 very important things that we tend to not recognize when we're grieving. When we are living in a heightened state of urgency, that fight or flight, our bodies are preparing us for battle. So what happens? Your body, your stomach, the second brain is cranking out the acid, right? It's like it's pumping out all of this hydrochloric acid inside of your stomach. And when you're not eating, where that gets absorbed, then that kind of hangs around, and the detrimental effects of that is that acid laying on your stomach lining can create ulcers, and they could be superficial or they could be deep penetrating ulcers, which then ends you in a place of having some melena, which is when blood goes through your system and is digested. That may sound gross, but when your body breaks it down, let's put it that way, then it turns black when it comes out. So you may not even be realizing that your body is suffering blood loss from an ulcer because you're looking for bright red blood, right? Which is a lot of times an indication of hemorrhoids or something more ominous. But right now, what I'm trying to teach you is the effects of the acid that it can have in your stomach. So it can create literal holes in your stomach. And there's a bacteria called Helicobacter that can live in your stomach as well, which predisposes you to significant ulcer and problems in your gut. And if you're having indigestion, if you're having, I need to point out here that sometimes that can be ignored, and that could be chest pain, because there's a certain type of area in your heart when you are having some problems there, it shows up as GI issues, and you might think that you're just having indigestion, and you could be having a heart attack. So let's don't ignore this, friend. And that acid reflux, then, if you're going to bed at night, and especially if you're eating late at night and then laying down, it's so bad for you, friend, because that acid that your body's producing to break down whatever you've taken on is now rolling up towards your esophagus. And all of us have these little sphincters. They're little muscles that is at the end of your esophagus. It's called the LES. And when that little muscle gets a little loosey-goosey, when you lay down, that acid backflows into your esophagus. Now you're setting yourself up for esophagitis. Continued exposure into your esophagus can lead to something called Barrett's esophagus. When you start developing Barrett's esophagus, it is a precursor to esophageal cancer. So I go down this path, friend, to try to teach you the importance of not ignoring your body. And I didn't even get into the potential bowel disease. Irritable bowel syndrome is just that. It's a syndrome that usually oscillates back between diarrhea and constipation. But there is something called bowel disease that is categorized into two categories. It's Crohn's disease, or something we call ulcerative colitis. And a lot of times you might just attribute the diarrhea that you're having to just the fact that you're grieving or you ate something. But if this is a continual situation that you're dealing with where you are having a lot of diarrhea, that needs to be looked into, friend, because this is why. If you're genetically disposed to these bowel diseases that I talked to you about, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, whenever you have a really traumatic event, a stress event like the death of your child, that might activate that dormant gene. Now, this bowel disease is an autoimmune disorder. Remember when I told you a little back when we were talking about the initial effects of grief, they can cause us to have autoimmune disorders. Those a lot of times will live dormant in our bodies until it's triggered. So if you are having a lot of diarrhea and GI issues, please go see your doctor, friend. Just a simple colonoscopy can allow them to be able to look inside your colon and see what's going on there, because whenever your body gets full of ulcers and it can't absorb the nutrition, that's how you end up having nutritional deficiencies. And if you're having a lot of vomiting and diarrhea, then you're also not absorbing things that you need to support you. Okay, so that's your big lesson today on GI medicine. Now, number 5, and this is a scary one, friend, and I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but I do want to point it out. Those of us who have experienced the death of our children are at an increased risk of early mortality. Well, what does that mean? That means early death. Now, don't stop listening right now, because when I get through this, I'm going to give you the tools to keep all of this stuff that we just talked about from happening, or at least lessen its effects. So still stay with me. A heartbreaking reality for many bereaved parents, especially moms, okay? Are you listening? Especially moms, are at a higher risk of early mortality. Research from the University of York found that parents who lost a child have a 30% higher risk of dying within the first 2 years of their child's death compared to non-bereaved parents. Now, this isn't surprising when you consider the severe mental, emotional, and physical toll grief takes on our bodies. But I don't want you to get stuck on that, friend. I want to point it out to you for one reason. You need to understand something. Studies suggest that the loss of a child is often considered particularly a very intense and long-lasting type of grief, exceeding the intensity experienced in other types of losses. Now, hear me out. Don't go away from this podcast and say, Teresa said that child loss is worse than any other loss. That is not what I'm saying, friend. Each one of us who have experienced child loss has unique stories. The way we process our grief are very unique. I teach inside the Grief Roadmap. We learn all about grieving styles so that we can understand how to grieve in a family. Moms and dads, siblings, everybody grieves differently. All of our losses create a unique situation. And so does other types of losses. Remember, we don't compare losses, friend. But I am simply pointing out to you what the research shows about child loss. It sets us up for prolonged or complicated grief if you don't get the help you need. Now, we're going to break down what is necessary here in just a minute. But I want to teach you something. Friend, if you're the type of person and you're waiting for your knight in shining armor to show up and wave a magic wand over you and take all of this pain away, I'm so sorry, friend, but that's not going to happen. The loss of your child is so intense because it happened to you, your child, the life that grew inside of your body. No one can do this grief work for you, friend. That's why we start out in the Grief Roadmap with me teaching you what a boundary is, what that looks like, and how to use it in your journey so that you can become your own best advocate, because no one is going to do it for you, friend. I'm sorry. There is some tough love for you right there. So if that's you, you really need to pay attention to today's episode, because you need to know what is happening inside your body and what to do about it. Now, let's talk about the importance of support in the grieving process. Experiencing the loss of a child is unparalleled. It is profound, and it affects every aspect of your life. And as stated before, the grief journey is intensely personal. And the support systems and the coping mechanisms that you choose will significantly influence the quality of your life. So what does that look like? So many times when Tony and I go to the grief retreats and we facilitate and we help grieving moms and dads, many times people that come to those retreats have not sought out any type of support outside of themselves. Friend, that will not go well for you. And here's why. Living alone inside the walls of your grief, living with your own irrational thoughts without having anyone to help you see inside those thoughts that they are not rational, is a dangerous place to be. It's going to set you up for isolation. It's going to set you up in a place where you start to build a wall around yourself to protect yourself because you don't have the tools to be able to manage it, much less manage social situations when you start to integrate back into society. So if that's you, friend, please listen carefully, because I'm going to talk to you about the ways that you can receive support and why that is so important. Number one is grief counseling. Now, I hear over and over, yeah, I went to see a counselor and it just didn't help me and I'm just done with that. And on further investigation, I found out they went once and they weren't a good fit, so they just quit. Friend, like I said, no one is going to do this grief work for you. And if you just take that big tamping tool, when I grew up, I lived on a farm and my dad and I dug some post holes, friend. I know how to dig a post hole. And once you get that where you want it to be, you got to tamp down that dirt. And I remember out there with my dad, tamping it down, and you'd think he'd come over and I'd say, okay, we're all done here, Dad. And he'd come over looking and he said, nope, sis, you got some ways to go. And he would just have me keep tamping it down, because if you don't, that post is going to start wiggling, right? The whole purpose of a fence is to keep the cows inside, right? So this is a lesson for you, friend. You cannot take that tamping tool and just keep tamping it down further and further and further and further, because it will not go well for you. And I don't want you to be one of those statistics that I talked about in the previous segment. All right, here's what the research shows. You want to hear this? It takes at least 18 months to benefit from grief counseling. Well, if you just rolled your eyes and said, ain't nobody got time for that, then this is the question that I have for you, friend. You either invest in that 18 months with your time and your effort and your money, or in 7 years from now and 10 years from now, you're going to be in the same place that you are right now. I'm trying to teach you how to learn to live and not just exist. Because this is not a one and done thing. You don't do this one time. Friend, with grief brain, on a normal day, so here's some facts for you. On a normal day without stress, it takes someone 7 times to hear something before they begin to retain it. Now, I don't have a statistic for you that says how many times you have to hear something when you have grief brain, but we can probably double, triple, and maybe quadruple that, okay? Because you know exactly what I'm talking about. So learning the tools that you need, you're not going to show up one time in a counseling or a mentor session and get the tools you need and say, okay, thank you so much, and you're done with that. No, friend, that is not how it works. It is a process. It is called a journey for a reason. Now, the second way that you can get support is inside of support grief groups. Now, I have a lot to say about this, and I want you to tune in here and listen, because grief support groups are only as effective as the amount of effort that you put into them. So if you say, well, I've done a grief support group and that didn't work for me. Well, there's 2 problems there. It's either the quality of the relationships or the quantity of support that you're receiving. And we're going to talk about both of those. So I had a positive experience in Grief Share, and Tony and I went on to lead a group. And I know that that's not everyone's experience. But friend, when I went into my Grief Share group, most of the people there, their losses were spousal. There were a few that had lost parents, but the majority of the people there had lost spouses. It was me, and me and Tony, and there was one other couple that had lost a child the first time that we went through. So grief support groups, like I said, are only as effective as the amount of effort you put into it, which means you have to show up, friend. So you're probably thinking right now, this all sounds so difficult, and I just don't have the energy for that. And I really do understand that, friend. But some things are worth pushing yourself a little bit for. So what is the role of social support inside of these grief groups? Like I said, the quality and the quantity of the support play crucial roles in your grieving process. Well, you might say, Teresa, explain what you're talking about. Let's talk about the quality of the relationships, because the depth and the authenticity of the social connections that you make inside of those groups will have a significant impact on your experience. So what does that mean? That means you need high quality relationships characterized by some genuine empathy. All right. I need to know that the person that I'm talking to and I'm sharing in these grief groups gets me and they understand what I'm going through. When you have a grief group like that, where you can be you and experience that empathy and understanding, it has significantly better outcomes. So how do you find a group like that? Well, that's a good question. And that's what I provide for you in the Grief Roadmap. The quality of relationships that develop from the time we start to the time we end. I can't even put words to it, friend. Now, you can go to my website and you can read the experience from the last group. What happens inside of this group, I can't even begin to understand it. The only thing that I know is that I pray and we invite the Holy Spirit every single time. Now, that's a piece for me that cannot be left out. I've been to some grief support groups that do not bring in the hope of Jesus Christ, and I did not last there, friend. So be careful what you expose yourself to. The quality of the relationships significantly affects the outcomes and the quantity of support. So let's talk about that for a minute. If you go to a support group, once a month is good, but once a month is not enough. And that's just the fact. You need support. I need support on a regular basis. Weekly is ideal. And that's what we do inside the Grief Roadmap. We meet weekly. The gals go over all of the content, and then we come back every single week to go over that. And right now I have a morning group and an evening group. And what is happening is that bond between those women has grown so strong that a lot of times everybody comes to both groups because it gives us 2 times to be together. That's what happens, friend. That's what happens when the quality of the relationships and the quantity of the support are met. So let's talk about what happens when we grieve alone, when we do not seek out that external support. Now, we talked about that briefly. And what happens is we tend to isolate. We live inside the world of our own thoughts, which is not a safe place to be generally. Right? Our own thoughts can take us down pathways that can get us believing truth that is nothing but lies and create a situation for prolonged and or complicated grief. I had a friend of mine who I've actually interviewed on the podcast, Tom Gilbert, who explained to me prolonged and complicated grief is like the arms of an octopus. When you think about an octopus, I want you to think about the long tentacles of all of the arms that are just moving about, and they grab you and they pull you in and they wrap themselves around you. Those are your thoughts, the things that you cannot control, your guilt that begins to take over your life because you have condemned yourself guilty and judged yourself with a sentence already. All of the aspects of grief that are so difficult, the loneliness of it, this is happening to you. And all of these tentacles are wrapping themselves around you, and they are creating a situation that is keeping you stuck because you are doing the opposite of what Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 tells us to do, which is do not lean on your own understanding. And until you have somebody that can open that back door for you and help you see your blind spots, that is going to be a dangerous place for you to be. Grieving alone sets you up for all of the physical aspects that I talked about without any relief in sight. So friend, don't do this alone. You don't have to. Right? It's like I told you in the beginning of the episode, I have 7 ways to support you that are free. Take advantage of every one of those. And then if you want to go a little deeper, then you create some time where you and I can sit down together and we can work through those places where I can help you see your blind spots. All right. So how do we care for our body while we're grieving? We've talked about this quite a bit on the podcast, so I'm just going to hit on them very quickly here. Number 1, stay hydrated. Dehydration can worsen fatigue, headaches, and brain fog. Did you know that? I know, friend, I know that coffee's keeping you alive, or that Diet Coke, in my instance, was keeping me alive. But friend, listen, caffeine dehydrates you. Remember those little army men that I was talking about that's running around knocking on the doors of your cells, trying to get them to open up to get rid of the toxins that are living inside of your body right now, that your body's making, that you need to flush out? Well, when you don't give yourself enough water, guess what happens? The volume in your bloodstream diminishes. So there's nothing to flush it out. Be kind to your body. You know the first place your body goes to get water when it needs it to run your body, to do the process? Your colon. Because that's the safest place for it to take it from. Your colon is a holding tube for waste. When your body takes the water from your colon, guess what happens? Yeah, you get real constipated. So let's think through this. Hydration. Try to think about making sure starting your day with water, making sure you're getting in enough of those fluids. Number 2, prioritize rest. Even if sleep is difficult, resting your body helps restore that energy and gives it what it needs to perform for you on a daily basis. Gentle movement. We're not talking about marathons here, friend. You are not in a place, probably, unless you were very physically fit before your child left your side, you're probably not in a place where you want to go out and train for a marathon. If that's motivating for you, listen, I work with grieving moms whose kids were amazing athletes, and that is motivation for them to get out there and move their bodies. Great. Whatever it takes, moving your body, like walking, stretching, yoga, anything that eases the tension that your body is holding, and it improves circulation. The fluid moves through your body. There's this complicated process, right? It goes in the right side of your body, it comes out the left side of your body, and it's this huge cycle that repeats itself. If you don't move, then you're not allowing that fluid to get pushed back up into your heart to go back out on the other side that has all the good stuff in it, right? It's like this transport. It's like this drop off, right? All of the stuff comes up through your veins in the left side of your heart. Your body gets rid of it. It picks up all the good things like oxygen and nutrients and pushes it out the right side for your body to absorb it. Very simplified version, but you get what I'm talking about. So if you don't get up and move around, that circulation gets real sluggish, and then you're going to start noticing that you've got swelling in your feet, swelling in your legs. So you got to get up and move, friend. Sitting for long periods of time, it's not a good thing. Eat nourishing foods. Even if you don't have an appetite, small meals. Make sure you include protein. And if that means going out and get you a protein shake so that you can get your nutrition in, then do it, right? Just try to get one that doesn't have very much sugar in it, because then that has the opposite effect of what you're trying to do. And then the very last piece of how to care for yourself, friend, is to seek support. If you feel like your body is breaking under the weight of grief, know that what you're experiencing is real. Grief just doesn't live in the heart. It leaves its mark on every part of you. But just as your body is affected by grief, it can also be improved with the habits that I'm trying to teach you today by caring for yourself, okay? But not meaning getting you a mani or a pedi. If that's what you want to do and that makes you feel better, go for it. I'm talking about caring for your body on a daily basis and keeping yourself in the presence of God and His sustaining grace. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, it tells us, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness." Your body may feel weak, friend, but His strength is carrying you one step at a time, one breath at a time. And if you need to spend some time with me, don't hesitate to make that appointment, because I can't wait to meet you. And I can't wait to help give you the tools that you need to navigate this hard road of child loss. And that's all I have for you today, friend. So until next time, take care.